All right, so today let's do a deep dive into something pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
It's this whole concept of antifragility.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at some excerpts from Nassim Taleb's book, Antifragility.
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully by the end of this, we can kind of wrap our heads around how we can actually cultivate antifragility, in our own lives.
Yeah, I think that's a really good goal.
Mm,
I think a lot of people think about bouncing back from setbacks and things like that.
right.
But Taleb actually goes a step further. He's talking about things that actually benefit from stressors,
Oh,
disorder,
really?
even chaos.
It's kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can something actually gain from disorder?
Yeah.
It's like that analogy he uses about a package labeled, please mishandle.
Right.
What could possibly thrive on being treated roughly?
It's such a vivid image, isn't it? I
Yeah.
think most of us are used to seeing handle with care on packages
Right.
and assuming that that's just what everything needs.
Right.
But that's where the concept of the triad comes in.
Right.
And figuring out where something falls on that spectrum, I think, is crucial to understanding how to improve it.
So the triad is fragile, robust, and antifragile.
That's right.
So if we can identify something as fragile, we can start to see where those potential breaking points are,
Yeah,
and maybe even find ways to make them more robust or even anti-fragile.
exactly. Like take centralized states, for example.
Okay.
They're inherently fragile
How so?
because everything hinges on that central authority. So any disruption there, and the whole system's at risk.
Oh, I see.
Compare that to a decentralized network, like a system of city-states.
Okay.
They're much more anti-fragile because power and decision-making are distributed.
Interesting.
So even if one part is disrupted, the others can adapt and keep going.
So it's like the difference between putting all your eggs in one basket
Yeah,
versus diversifying your investments.
that's a great analogy.
Right.
It highlights how this concept applies not just to physical things, but
Yeah.
also to systems ideas.
Even how we structure our lives.
Okay, so we've got this idea that modern society, with its focus on control and predictability,
Yeah,
often makes things more fragile, not less.
that's right. And Taleb argues that by trying to eliminate randomness and variation, we actually create hidden vulnerabilities.
Like suppressing forest fires.
Yes.
It seems like a good idea on the surface.
Right.
You end up creating this buildup of flammable material, and eventually you get these massive, uncontrollable fires.
Precisely. And that's a perfect example of how overstabilization can lead to even bigger problems down the road.
So if we're trying to build anti-fragility, how do we avoid falling into that trap of trying to control everything?
Well, Taleb points to the importance of having skin in the game.
Okay.
He uses the example of the ancient code of Hammurabi,
Mm-hmm.
where builders were held personally responsible if their structures collapsed.
Oh, wow. So if a builder knew their life was literally on the line,
Yeah.
if their work wasn't solid,
Yeah.
they were going to make darn sure that it was built to last. Exactly. And that's a powerful incentive to prioritize long-term resilience over short-term gains.
Right.
It forces you to really think through the consequences of your actions,
It's like that saying, you don't learn to ride a bicycle by reading a book.
right?
You have to actually get on the bike and risk falling a few times to really master it.
That's a great way to put it. Having skin in the game means you're directly exposed to the consequences of your choices,
Mm.
both good and bad.
This also ties into Taleb's skepticism about predictions, right?
Yeah.
He argues that in complex systems, especially forecasts, are often unreliable.
Right. And he tells this great story about Takatoshi Kato,
Okay.
this economist who confidently presented all these detailed economic projections.
Oh,
But when asked about his track record, particularly predictions made before the 2008 financial crisis,
yeah.
let's just say it wasn't his finest moment.
Yeah, those experts with their fancy models, they don't always get it right.
The problem is that complex systems are full of interdependencies and unpredictable reactions, so a small, unforeseen event can have this ripple effect
Hmm.
and completely throw off those carefully crafted forecasts.
So if we can't rely on predictions,
Yeah.
what can we do to navigate a world that feels increasingly uncertain?
Instead of trying to predict the future, we should focus on building robustness and anti-fragility into our systems and lives.
So instead of trying to predict which specific stock will take off, I should focus on diversifying my portfolio
That's a great example.
and building a long-term strategy.
It's about being prepared for a range of outcomes, not just the ones we hope for.
Now, I have to ask about the story of Thales, the ancient Greek philosopher.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like Taleb really loves that one.
The story of Thales and the olive presses is a classic illustration of profiting from uncertainty without trying to predict the future.
So Thales basically secured the option to use the olive presses during harvest,
Right.
but didn't commit to actually using them.
Exactly. He saw the potential for high demand for olive oil, but didn't try to predict the exact price or yield. He secured the option to capitalize if things went in his favor.
So when it turned out to be a bumper crop,
Yes.
he exercised his option and made a killing.
And he made a lot of money.
So the key takeaway is this idea of optionality,
That's right.
having the flexibility to benefit from a range of outcomes.
It's like having multiple doors open so you can choose the path that makes the most sense as the situation unfolds.
This reminds me of something else Taleb talks about,
Okay.
how even simple innovations like the invention of the wheeled suitcase
Yeah.
can be incredibly transformative.
Right. And that leads to another interesting point.
What's that?
Taleb argues that our obsession with formal education and top-down knowledge often blinds us to the wisdom of tinkering and learning by doing.
So he's suggesting that sometimes the best way to learn is to just get out there and experiment,
Exactly.
even if we make a few mistakes along the way.
He even uses the example of traders understanding complex options without knowing the advanced math behind them. They learn by adapting to the market's fluctuations.
It's almost like real-world experience can sometimes be more valuable than theoretical knowledge.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about fragile and anti-fragile,
Mm-hmm.
but what about those things that are neither?
Yeah.
What about the things that are just robust?
Robustness is important too. Robust things can withstand shocks,
Okay.
but they don't necessarily benefit from them. Think of a sturdy oak tree.
Okay.
It can weather many storms,
Right.
but it doesn't get stronger because of the storms.
So robust things survive, but anti-fragile things actually thrive and improve
Exactly.
in the face of challenges.
And the key, as we said earlier, is figuring out where something falls on that spectrum.
The triad.
The triad, so we can understand how to improve its condition.
Okay.
Do we need to make it more robust, more anti-fragile, or perhaps even reduce its fragility in some way?
This is all incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
And, this makes me think about Taleb's contrasting figures of Fat Tony and Socrates.
That's where Taleb's playful side comes out. Right. Fat Tony is this street-smart businessman, all about practical wisdom and not being a sucker.
Okay.
Socrates represents the archetypal philosopher focused on abstract knowledge and reasoning.
Is he saying one approach is better than the other?
Not necessarily. It's more about recognizing the value of both types of knowledge.
Yep.
Fat Tony prioritizes what works in the real world,
Mm-hmm.
focusing on payoffs and avoiding downsides.
Right.
Socrates brings a different kind of intellectual rigor,
Okay.
but maybe isn't as street smart.
I find myself relating to both of them, to be honest. Sometimes I get caught up in analyzing every detail, trying to predict every outcome.
That's a common trap, especially in today's information-saturated world.
Right.
But Taleb argues that often the simpler approach is better.
This less is more idea is really intriguing. Can you give me some examples of that in action?
Sure, think about the effectiveness of simple heuristics like location, location, location in real estate.
Right.
It captures an essential truth about that market.
Or even the simple rule of thumb, remove distractions when crossing the street.
Exactly. By focusing on the essential and filtering out the noise, we can make better decisions and avoid unnecessary risks.
This is so helpful. It's like he's giving us a mental toolkit for navigating complexity.
Yeah.
Now tell me more about this Lindy effect thing.
The Lindy effect is fascinating. It states that the longer something non-perishable has survived, like a technology or idea, the longer its future life expectancy.
So something that's been around for a long time is more likely to stick around even longer.
Think about ancient proverbs or philosophical ideas that have stood the test of time.
Yeah.
They've survived for a reason.
Right.
They offer valuable insights into human nature and the world around us.
They have that Lindy quality.
Exactly.
It's the opposite of those fleeting trends and fads that disappear as quickly as they emerge.
Right. The Lindy effect is a powerful way to evaluate the staying power of ideas, technologies, even institutions.
Okay, one more concept I have to ask about. Via negativa and subtractive knowledge.
Okay.
Those sound pretty intense.
This is where we get into Taleb's approach to knowledge.
Okay.
Via negativa focuses on what something is not, rather than trying to define it directly.
So instead of saying what something is, we focus on what it isn't.
Yeah.
That sounds a bit roundabout.
It might seem counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but it's powerful, especially when dealing with complex or uncertain topics.
Okay.
It's often easier to identify what's wrong than to definitively say what's right.
Like those optical illusions where it's easier to spot the differences between two images
Right.
than to describe each image in detail.
Exactly. Subtractive knowledge is about removing fragilities and focusing on what stood the test of time.
So instead of always trying to add new things,
Mhm.
we should focus on eliminating weak points and vulnerabilities.
That's a key principle of anti-fragility.
Okay?
By subtracting what's fragile, we make the overall system stronger and more resilient.
It's like decluttering your home, but for your life.
Exactly. It's about
Ah.
simplifying, getting rid of what's not serving you, and focusing on what truly matters.
This has given me a whole new perspective on problem solving.
And that leads to what Taleb calls subtractive prophecy.
Okay.
It's about predicting the future by removing what's fragile from it, rather than trying to add all sorts of speculative elements.
So instead of trying to predict every possible scenario,
Yeah.
you focus on identifying and eliminating the things that are likely to break or cause problems.
Precisely. It's a more grounded, realistic approach to navigating uncertainty.
This is really challenging my assumptions about knowledge and forecasting.
And that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
The more we question our assumptions, the more anti-fragile we become.
Okay, last but not least, tell me about this barbell strategy for an anti-fragile life.
Okay.
It sounds like some intense workout routine.
It's not about lifting weights,
Okay.
but it is about balance. The barbell strategy is about combining extremes,
Okay.
secure stability on one side and calculated risk-taking on the other.
So it's like having a diversified portfolio,
Yeah.
but instead of just spreading investments,
Yeah.
you're spreading your activities across a spectrum of risk and reward.
Exactly. It's about having a solid foundation of security
Mm-hmm.
while also exploring opportunities for growth and innovation.
Could you give me some real-life examples of this?
Sure. In investing, you might have a large portion of your assets in safe, stable investments like government bonds, while also allocating a smaller portion to higher risk, higher reward ventures.
So it's like having a stable job that pays the bills while also pursuing a side hustle
That's a perfect example.
or passion project you're excited about.
The barbell strategy isn't limited to finance.
Okay.
You can apply it to your career choices,
Mm-hmm.
health regimen,
Wow.
even your social life.
This is making me think about how I can apply this strategy to different areas of my own life.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance between comfort and challenge, security and exploration.
It's about embracing both ends of the spectrum, not getting stuck in the middle.
This has been an incredible deep dive into anti-fragility so far.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
I'm already starting to see the world in a whole new light.
Yeah.
It's like a new way of thinking about risk opportunity
Yeah.
and even success itself.
Absolutely.
It really feels like we're challenging that traditional narrative that we need to eliminate all risk and uncertainty to be successful.
Yeah,
In fact, it's almost the opposite.
exactly. Taleb argues that we shouldn't just try to survive challenges, we should actually seek them out and use them to our advantage.
Wow.
Of course, not recklessly,
Right.
but in a way that helps us grow.
It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right.
But Taleb takes it a step further. He's saying we should embrace the challenges, the stressors,
Yeah.
the things that force us to adapt and evolve.
It's about recognizing that those experiences are inevitable, and they can actually be the key to becoming more resilient and resourceful.
This is so empowering.
Yeah,
Instead of fearing the unknown, we can see it as an opportunity for growth.
absolutely. And those unexpected challenges often lead to the most significant breakthroughs,
Mm-hmm.
both personally and professionally.
This makes me think about all those times I've been thrown a curveball. And looking back, those experiences often led to the most significant growth.
Exactly. It's a reminder that setbacks and failures are not the end of the story.
Right.
They can be the catalyst for something even greater.
Now, I'm curious about Taleb's idea of the illusion of top-down knowledge.
Okay.
He seems skeptical of those in positions of authority, like academics and government officials.
Yeah.
Is he saying they're always wrong?
Not necessarily. He's challenging the assumption that formal education and research are the only sources of valuable knowledge.
Okay.
There's also wisdom and experience in tinkering, in learning by doing.
So it's not that all experts are wrong, but rather that we shouldn't blindly accept what they say without question.
Right. We need to be critical thinkers to evaluate information from multiple perspectives.
Okay.
Taleb argues that much of what we call knowledge actually comes from trial and error, from people who are out there getting their hands dirty and figuring things out as they go.
Like the Wright brothers, who were bicycle mechanics, not scientists or engineers,
Yeah.
but they managed to achieve powered flight when so many others thought it was impossible.
That's a perfect example. They were driven by passion and a willingness to experiment, not by fancy degrees or titles.
It makes you wonder how many great ideas have been dismissed because they didn't come from the right source
Yeah.
or fit the conventional wisdom.
That's why it's so important to be open to new ideas and to challenge the status quo.
So it's not about rejecting knowledge altogether.
Right.
It's about being discerning, questioning what we're told, and
Yeah.
being open to alternative viewpoints.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that true knowledge is constantly evolving. What we know today might be proven wrong tomorrow, and that's okay.
It's about embracing that process of learning and adaptation, not being afraid to make mistakes along the way.
Right, that's how we become more anti-fragile.
Now, I'd love to hear more about Taleb's thoughts on the ethical side of fragility and antifragility. He seems to have some strong opinions about who benefits from disorder and who bears the brunt of it.
This is where things get really interesting. Taleb argues that a major threat to anti-fragility is the lack of skin in the game,
Right.
especially for those in positions of power.
He's talking about those who make decisions that affect others, but don't have to face the consequences of those decisions.
Exactly. Think about bankers and policymakers who often profit from risky bets, even when those bets go bad and harm others.
Oh, I see.
They reap the rewards while everyday people are left to deal with the fallout.
It's like that saying, heads I win, tails you lose.
Right.
That doesn't seem fair or just...
Taleb argues that this asymmetry is a major driver of fragility in our systems. True accountability means sharing both the potential gains and losses.
It makes me think about those in leadership who make decisions that benefit them, even if it means harming others or the organization as a whole.
It's a pervasive problem, and it leads to a lack of accountability and a willingness to take unnecessary risks.
So how do we address this? How do we ensure that decision makers are held responsible for the consequences of their choices?
Taleb doesn't offer any simple solutions, but he advocates for a return to more localized systems where individuals have a greater stake in the outcome of their actions.
So instead of these massive complex systems where it's hard to trace responsibility,
Yeah.
we need to create structures where people are directly accountable for their choices.
Exactly. He uses the example of a system where those who design and build bridges are held liable if those bridges collapse.
Right.
That incentivizes them to prioritize safety and durability.
It makes sense when you think about it. When you have something to lose, you're more likely to think carefully about the risks involved.
It creates a natural system of checks and balances.
This makes me rethink how we structure our institutions and systems of governance. We've created incentives that reward recklessness and protect those in power from facing the consequences. But what about professions where it's not as clear-cut, where you can't have skin in the game in a financial sense?
Right.
What about artists or writers, for example?
Taleb addresses that too. He argues that skin in the game can take different forms. For a writer, it might mean putting their reputation on the line, opening themselves up to criticism, being willing to stand by their work, even if it's controversial.
So it's about having something at stake, something you care about, even if it's not directly financial.
Right. A writer who truly believes in their work is willing to face potential backlash.
Okay.
That vulnerability, that willingness to put themselves out there is a form of skin in the game.
It's about having a stake in the outcome, whatever form that takes.
And that sense of ownership and accountability often drives excellence and innovation.
This is really expanding my understanding of what it means to have skin in the game. It's not just about money. It's about caring deeply about the work you do and being willing to stand by it.
Exactly. And that commitment can be a powerful driver of anti-fragility.
But what about systems or institutions where it's impossible to eliminate all fragility? What about areas of life where we're inherently vulnerable to unexpected events?
That's a great question. In those situations, the key is to manage fragility, not try to eliminate it entirely.
So it's about recognizing our limitations and accepting that some degree of risk is inevitable.
Right. It's about making the system as robust as possible and having mechanisms in place to absorb shocks and adapt to changing circumstances.
It's like building a ship that can withstand a storm,
Right.
not trying to prevent storms altogether.
Exactly. And that brings us to the concept of redundancy, which Taleb highlights as a key principle of anti-fragility.
That makes sense. Redundancy means having backup systems or alternative options in place, right?
Yeah.
So that if one part of the system fails, the whole thing doesn't collapse.
Precisely, think about having multiple suppliers for a crucial component or a diversified investment portfolio.
Right.
These are practical examples of building in redundancy.
But redundancy can also be less tangible, right?
Yeah.
Like the importance of social networks and community support during a crisis.
Absolutely. Those are also forms of redundancy. They provide a safety net, a source of resilience when things get tough.
This is making me see how everything is interconnected and how even seemingly small things can contribute to or detract from the overall robustness of a system.
It's about taking a holistic view and recognizing that each element plays a role in the overall resilience of the system.
This is giving me a new perspective on risk management.
Hmm.
It's not just about eliminating risk, but about managing it intelligently.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that failure and setbacks are not the end of the story.
Right.
They can be valuable learning opportunities that help us build anti-fragility.
I'm starting to see the world through a different lens. It's not about avoiding risk, but about understanding it, embracing it, and using it to our advantage.
That's the power of anti-fragility.
Now I'm excited to hear more about Taleb's thoughts on randomness and volatility. It seems counterintuitive that those things could be beneficial.
It is counterintuitive, but Taleb argues that randomness and volatility aren't just inevitable. They're actually essential for fostering anti-fragility.
So he's saying we shouldn't try to eliminate all uncertainty and variation from our lives.
Exactly. In fact, attempts to overstabilize systems and eliminate all risk can backfire and make them more fragile in the long run.
This reminds me of the forest fire analogy again. By suppressing small fires, we create the conditions for much larger, more destructive fires.
That's a perfect illustration of how trying to control natural variations can have unintended consequences.
It's like our bodies. If we don't expose ourselves to stressors like exercise or intermittent fasting, our systems can become weaker and more susceptible to disease.
You're getting it. Taleb argues that anti-fragile systems thrive on randomness and variability.
Okay.
They use those stressors to adapt, evolve, and become stronger.
I'm starting to rethink my whole approach to life.
Yeah.
I tend to seek stability and avoid uncertainty as much as possible.
That's a natural human tendency. But Taleb argues that by embracing a certain amount of randomness and volatility, we can unlock a hidden source of strength and resilience.
Like that saying, comfort breeds weakness. We need to step outside our comfort zones and embrace new challenges to grow and become more adaptable.
Precisely. And it's about recognizing that failure and setbacks are not the end of the world. They're valuable opportunities for learning and becoming more anti-fragile.
This is incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we don't have to be afraid of the unknown.
Right. We can actually use it to our advantage.
Okay, so we've talked about embracing randomness and volatility.
Yeah.
But what about when uncertainty feels overwhelming or dangerous?
Yeah.
How do we know when to embrace it and when to protect ourselves from it?
That's an important question. Taleb would say the key is to distinguish between good and bad stressors.
So not all stressors are created equal.
Exactly. Some stressors are harmful and should be avoided. But others, like the kind we experience through exercise or pushing ourselves intellectually, can make us stronger and more resilient.
It's about being mindful of the types of stressors we're exposed to.
Yes, and it's about knowing ourselves and recognizing that the optimal level of stress varies from person to person and from situation to situation.
This makes me think about self-awareness and recognizing our own limits. We need to understand what stressors are beneficial and what stressors are detrimental.
Absolutely. And it's about finding a balance, embracing challenges, while also prioritizing self-care and well-being.
This is really clarifying my thinking about risk and uncertainty. It's not about eliminating all risk, but about managing it intelligently.
And choosing those stressors that can actually help us grow and become more anti-fragile.
I'm starting to see how this applies to so many areas of life.
The journey to anti-fragility is a continuous one, full of ups and downs and unexpected twists and turns.
This has been an incredible exploration of these concepts so far.
It's a powerful framework for understanding how to thrive in a world that's increasingly complex and unpredictable.
And it's a reminder that true resilience comes not from avoiding risk, but from embracing the elements that make us stronger and more adaptable. I feel like I'm starting to see the world through an entirely new lens.
Yeah.
One that doesn't shy away from uncertainty.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on. This idea that sometimes instead of trying to find the right solution,
Yeah.
it's better to focus on what not to do.
You're talking about via negativa, the power of subtraction.
Right.
It's a principle that's been applied in so many different fields, from philosophy and medicine to even decision-making.
It's like instead of constantly trying to add more to our lives,
Right.
sometimes it's better to simplify to get rid of the unnecessary clutter.
Yeah,
and focus on what's truly essential.
exactly. Often the best way to improve a system isn't to add more complexity, but to remove the elements that are causing fragility or dysfunction.
This reminds me of Taleb's discussion of iatrogenics,
Oh, yeah.
the harm caused by the healer.
Right.
He argues that in medicine, sometimes doing less can be more beneficial than aggressive intervention.
It's a great point. It highlights the potential downsides of overintervention and the importance of trusting the body's natural healing abilities.
Right.
Sometimes the best thing we can do is just get out of the way and let nature run its course.
It makes you wonder how many other areas of life could benefit from a more subtractive approach.
Taleb believes this principle can be applied almost anywhere. Whether we're talking about our personal lives, our work, or even societal systems, sometimes the best course of action is to pause, observe, and simply remove the obstacles that are preventing things from working properly.
This is such a powerful idea. It challenges that deeply ingrained belief that we always need to be doing something to solve a problem.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most effective action is inaction, or at least strategic inaction.
I know I'm guilty of this too. Whenever I face a challenge, my instinct is to jump into action mode.
Yeah,
But maybe stepping back and considering what I can stop doing would be more effective.
exactly. Sometimes the wisest course of action is to pause, observe, and simply remove the obstacles that are preventing the system from healing itself.
This is making me think about all the things I can subtract from my life, bad habits, unnecessary commitments, even those nagging negative thoughts that don't serve me.
It's a powerful shift in perspective. And it aligns with the idea of anti-fragility, focusing on making ourselves and our systems more resilient by removing the sources of fragility.
This whole deep dive into anti-fragility has been absolutely mind-blowing. It's like you've given me a whole new set of lenses to view the world, one that embraces uncertainty and finds opportunity in the midst of chaos.
I'm glad to hear that. These concepts have been transformative for me as well.
I'm feeling so inspired to take what I've learned and apply it to my own life, to embrace the things I can't control, to step outside my comfort zone, and to focus on building true resilience.
That's the spirit. Remember, the journey to anti-fragility is a continuous one, but it's a journey worth taking. As you go about your day, your week, your life, ask yourself, what areas could benefit from these principles? What fragilities can you subtract? What stressors can you embrace? What options can you create?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into anti-fragility. It's been an incredible journey, and we hope you've gained some valuable insights along the way. Till next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the power of anti-fragility.